Hello and welcome back to Political Science 101. This is a continuation of Chapter 4, which is about civil liberties. And we were just discussing the First Amendment protections on page 77, and we were discussing freedom of religion and why there is a need for a separation of church and state. And they have a wonderful example here on page 77. It talks about how many of the colonists that came to America were coming because they were a minority, religious minority, and they had religious persecution. So they come over to America and they set up government, and then they are perpetuating another type of religious persecution, because they were the minority, now they're majority. And you have to be very careful throughout history and political, when you're looking at politics, that there isn't a contradiction. It can't just be one group gets to have freedom. It has to be all groups, and majority, minority. All right, so this talks about in 1610, in Jamestown, the colony enacted a law requiring attendance at religious services on Sunday, both in the morning and in the evening. Repeat offenders were subjected to particularly harsh punishments. For those who twice violated, had to be whipped, were given the punishment of whipping. And for the third-time offenders, the punishment was death. And, as we see this kind of religious ideology kind of evolve, it seems ridiculous to us today, because people have a right to not participate. That is freedom of choice. That's a right that you have as a citizen. But here is a reason why it was so necessary. And it also talks about Thomas Jefferson. In 1802, he was a great proponent of religious freedom and tolerance, and there's a reason for that if you know anything about Thomas Jefferson. And he wanted this Establishment Clause, a wall of separation between the church and the state. And the context really helps in this manner. Thomas Jefferson, if you've ever been to his home in Monticello, he, in the museum area, there is a Bible that was his. And in the Bible, it shows you that he cut out the parts of the Bible that he did not agree with, which, may not agree with you or someone else or someone very religious or an atheist or any different types of religious beliefs, but that was his choice. And he actually, you can see the Bible where he cut out big chunks that he didn't agree with, and then he put the Bible according to Thomas Jefferson, because he had taken out the pieces that he didn't want. So it is really, it was really interesting to see that. And of course, I love visiting Monticello. Thomas Jefferson and I hold the same birthday, April the 13th. So, but we have very different ideas about both religion and slavery, for sure. He has some interesting closet skeletons concerning slavery, which very interesting and sad to read about. Anyway, so let's move on. This wall of separation, if you pay attention to your videos on government and politics, really talks about taxation and is it allowed to go to parochial schools and why not, and that's the Lemon Clause. It was in our textbook, and it's also in the video. Those videos are really helpful understanding. Crash course U.S. government and politics videos, okay, that I have on your module for you to watch. Okay, talks about prayers in school under this amendment as well. Is a moment of silence, is that constitutional? Evolution versus creationism, what is the constitutionality of this? And it's really important to remember that the Bill of Rights was not created to help the majority express what they feel, because in a democracy, if you read your textbook, the majority rules. It usually, that's the way society flows. What the Bill of Rights was designed to do by the writers, and it's very interesting and very important to know why they write it, was to protect the people that were the minority, the people that others disagreed with, a very small amount, and to protect their freedoms. And when you look at it kind of through that perspective, it does have kind of a different, just a different sentiment about it when you think about it. Okay. Talked about the parochial school vouchers, belief and practice. Very important on page 81. The Supreme Court has ruled consistently that the right to hold any belief is absolute. You can believe whatever you like. The right to practice one's belief, however, may have some limits. And they give the example of, suppose one believed that human sacrifice was a necessary part of religious worship. You can't really, you can believe that all you want to, but the practice of it is not going to work, because killing someone is a crime. Religious practices in the workplace, very interesting. They cite the Hobby Lobby lawsuit, which was definitely in the media, but we often don't hear how they are solved or how they're compromised or how they play out in the end. Seems like we hear the controversy, the drama, but then we never hear the ending. So it is really wonderful to be able to look through these court cases and to see how that case played out. And if you look on page 82, it talks about there was a compromise, because in 2014, Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, the Supreme Court closely held for-profit corporations would be exempted from requirement to provide birth control coverage if the owners objected to parts of the law on religious grounds. So what happened was President Barack Obama proposed a compromise. So therefore, these companies that did not feel it was right, according to their religious beliefs, they did not have to pay that tax. And then those employees who worked for them, they were still given the coverage if they so wanted it. So that was a compromise made to try and support both freedom of expression and freedom of religious belief in this portion. Okay, freedom of expression is really interesting. This section, do you have freedom of speech? It isn't absolute, and it does talk about that elementary schools, middle schools, high school students do not have the same freedom of speech as adults do. And I know as a former middle school and high school history teacher, that often came up and was expressed, and we would try to, let the kids know that there are certain instances that until you're an adult, you don't have that complete freedom of speech. And that is, it has been upheld in different court cases, and they cite a few. And we don't have freedom of speech in every situation. If you look on page 82, very interesting. Freedom of speech would not protect a man who falsely shouts fire in a theater, causing panic and people to injure themselves, or at a concert, or on the beach, or if someone got hurt or injured, they're kind of liable for that because that is could incite panic. You have seditious speech, which urges resistance to lawful authority or advocates overthrowing the government. I know with different rap songs, that was early on when rap came out. There was a lot of, controversy. Is this freedom of speech? Is this how they fight back in oppression? And that kind of went through. And, freedom of speech in a song is kind of an artistic expression of life. So I know that was something early on that there was some issues with. The police, and maybe you saw Straight Outta Compton, really deals with some of that. Okay. Slander and libel is really interesting on page 83. Libel is a published report of falsehood that tends to injure a person's reputation or character. Slander is the public utterance, speaking of a statement that holds a person up for contempt, ridicule, or hatred. All right. Okay, different things that are considered obscene, and then you have the Miller test that they talk about, and then restrictions on pornography. Any child pornography where a child is involved is considered acts of child abuse. So the children are protected. And that's where at the bottom of 84 it talks about elementary and high school and middle school students, is there free speech for students? Okay. I love the quote on top of page 85. The only security of all is in a free press. It is necessary to keep the waters pure, and that's by Thomas Jefferson, to be able to, that the press can print what it needs to keep government officials and just the public honest. Okay. Right to privacy is a very touchy subject, and many people feel this is the most important right, is your right to privacy, especially in this cyber age. You have the abortion and privacy laws. You have the right to die. Really, just some interesting debates. And if you read on page 87, just really, do we have the right to die as a citizen? That's just really, talking about the different ideologies there. Cyberbullying hits close to home. I believe one of the first teenagers to commit suicide due to revenge porn was in Cincinnati, close to Cincinnati, and just really a very sad case. And I believe it was an only child. Talks about revenge porn and that you can be prosecuted if those pictures show up on the internet without the person's permission. Just really difficult situations. The Patriot Act, which really is a volatile point of contention, and goes on to talk about, Snowden and kind of whistleblowing in that area. And then it kind of talks about that President Obama really didn't, he promised to make clean breaks from the Bush administration and national security, and really that did not happen as clearly. I believe some things were pulled back in regards to privacy, but not completely removed. Okay, the rights of the accused. The death penalty, cruel and unusual punishment. Very interesting, the Miranda warnings. Clarifying issues in 1966, the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision called Miranda versus Arizona. In that case, the court enunciated the Miranda warnings that are now familiar to most all Americans due to crime shows. Seeing that you have to, give the Miranda, make sure you say the Miranda clause. Prior to any questioning, the person must be warned that he has a right to remain silent, that any statement he does may be used against him, and that he has a right to the presence of an attorney, either retained or appointed. Okay, that does finish out civil liberties, the chapter on civil liberties. It is very contentious, heated, and debated, these different liberties. And almost all Americans claim to believe in individual rights. And it's just difficult to define that freedom. And often one right appears to interfere with another. So, you have those clashing. All right, the next chapter, we will be talking about civil rights. And that's chapter 5.